What's going on, everybody? Tony again, welcoming you to another video. And today we're going to talk about death in comics. So stick around. Death. It is an inevitable part of life. Everybody alive today will have to deal with death sooner or later. Unless you're a comic book character. In comics, it's a little bit different. There are many different patterns of death in comics, whether it's the death of a character that fuels the hero's origin or drive to do what is right. There's the noble sacrifice, and then there's deaths that just shock everything or everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that, and then I'm going to mention a few comic book deaths that stick out in my mind, and I hope you enjoy it. So yes, today's topic for Tony's Topics is death in comics. Okay, so the first example of death in comics that I want to talk about is what would be commonly known as the I guess it would be the death of a character that was the foundation of a hero's origin. Two of the most prominent examples of that would be, one would be the death of Uncle Ben in Amazing Fantasy 15. With this death, of course everybody knows the story. Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider. He tried to become a celebrity. He failed to stop a robber when he had the chance, and consequently that same burglar robbed his aunt and uncle and shot and killed his uncle. And grief-stricken by a need for revenge, he went to the warehouse where the cops had him cornered, and after defeating the burglar, he seen that the burglar was the same guy that he had let pass earlier. And he realized that, as the slogan goes, with great power comes great responsibility, because if he had stopped the burglar the first time, his uncle would still be alive. And this drove him to become a superhero, and it drove him to do what he thought was right to protect people, to make sure that it never happened again. And it's been a driving force for the character ever since. Now, the second example, most everybody knows it, whether you watch the movies or whatnot, is the death of Bruce Wayne's parents. Now, I don't know exactly what comic actually first talked about the death of Bruce Wayne's parents. If you know what it is, put that book down in the comments. But seeing his parents gunned down by a mugger at a very young age motivated Bruce to go around the world and train in different styles of fighting. He picked up detective skills. I mean, he spent the better part of his younger years becoming the type of training to become the type of person that he wanted to be, to ensure that when he came back to Gotham, that he was going to strike fear in the heart of criminals and make sure that what happened to him in that alley never happened to another soul. And he is really driven, of course, by the death of his parents. These are, to me, are the two best examples of death as far as using it as a character basis or origin. Now we're going to talk about death as what could be considered a hero's greatest failures. A hero tries to do everything they can, he or she can, to save as many people as they can, but usually something happens and they're not able to save someone, and usually it's a person that they love or is related to them or is close to them romantically or whatnot, or a partner. The three examples I have of this, the first one would be Bucky Barnes. Cap was unable to save Bucky off the, I believe it was either a rocket or a missile or something, It was mentioned in Avengers #4 in 1964 when they found Cap frozen when the Avengers found Cap frozen in the ice. He realized that Bucky died, and I believe it was a plane or something. Like I said, I don't remember. It's been a long time, but anyway, Cap had fallen off the whatever it was and fell into the icy waters, and as soon as he fell off, it exploded, and he knew Bucky was on there. So, he woke up with the knowledge of knowing that Bucky had died and he wasn't able to save him. So, in a way, that could be considered one of Cap's greatest failures. Now, of course, we know in comics, he came back many, many years later, and he is now the Winter Soldier. And so that would be a good example for Cap. Now I'm going to bring up Batman again. And to me, one of the greatest failures that one of the things that Batman would consider one of his greatest failures was, of course, the death of Jason Todd in Batman 428, part of the Death in the Family storyline, where, of course, Jason was out looking for his mom, found her in Ethiopia. Of course, she was dealing with the Joker. Batman was trying to save some people. There was a truckload of supplies that was poisoned by the Joker's laughing gas, and he was trying to stop the shipment, and he told Jason not to go into the warehouse where the Joker was. Of course, Jason didn't listen, and he went in there, and he was betrayed by his mother, and the Joker savagely beat him with a crowbar and blew him up blew up the warehouse with him and his mother inside. Of course, Batman showed up just as the warehouse was exploding, and Batman 428, he finds Jason's body. And this has hit him as bad as watching his parents die, because he was not there to save somebody that he had been entrusted to take care of. And that actually really it became a determining factor in the future of the comics ever since. I remember when Tim Drake became Robin. At first, he didn't want Tim to be Robin, but after a little while, Tim he was able to convince Bruce to let him do it. And even when he did become Robin, Batman redeveloped the whole Robin suit to protect Robin, to make sure, or try to make sure it never happened again. And Jason's death had an impact on Batman all the way up to, I believe it was during the Hush storyline, and I think there was a storyline called Under the Red Hood, where the Red Hood came back and it ended up being Jason. And that's a whole nother thing, how he came back. The last example of a death that would be considered a greatest failure is, of course, the death of Gwen Stacy. Amazing Spider-Man 121, the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn got his memories back of him being the Green Goblin, and he remembered that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. He went to Peter's apartment to get him, and Gwen was there, and he took Gwen captive, and I believe he left her purse with a pumpkin bomb on it or something like that. And of course, Spider-Man tracked him down to the George Washington Bridge. They fought, and when he tried to knock the Goblin out and was running to grab Gwen and take her to safety, but the Goblin knocked her off the bridge. Spider-Man shot a web to try to save her, and he caught her, but the momentum of, I guess, the fall and the sudden stop with Spider-Man's web broke her neck, and she died. And that death for Spider-Man had constantly stayed with him, even when he was contemplating marrying Mary Jane in Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21. He still thought about how Gwen died. There's also another interesting limited series called Spider-Man Blue, where he's talking into a tape recorder about Gwen, which is a really good read. But yes, the death of Gwen Stacy is still, even now, is still reverberated in the comics. And now some of these deaths could be considered shocking as well. The last two examples I just mentioned, Jason and Gwen, really shocked a lot of people, because when Gwen died, not a lot of characters, not a lot of supporting characters passed away like that. I believe Gwen's death is considered the end of the Silver Age and the start of the Bronze Age. That is easily debatable. It could be anything else. There could be other books that I'm not thinking of, but I believe that book has always been considered the start of the Bronze Age. When they killed Jason Todd, and I say they, I'm not talking about the artist and the writers of the story. Something interesting, I believe it was 88, 89, in September, when Batman 426 came out, the directed copy, it had a phone ad in it, or an advertisement where the reader got to pick if Jason lived or died. You either called one number to see whether or not he lived, or another number for him to die. And the votes came in. There was like over 10,000 votes, and the readers voted to kill Jason Todd or Robin. Now there was always a rumor that some guy had set up his computer to call the death number and like 600 times or something. And it's interesting because it's never really been, I don't know what, it has never really been confirmed. But if it was true and they could actually prove that this guy with the computer did that, if you took those votes off, Jason would have lived. But yeah, because a lot of people, I mean, even me, I voted in that as well. I voted to kill him because I didn't know much about the character. And then I felt bad about it and voted again to have him live. So, we didn't figure he'd actually stay dead, and no, he stayed dead for like maybe 17, 20 years. I don't remember. I don't remember the year it was when he came back as the Red Hood, but we never thought he would die, but they killed him. Another shocking death, of course, that's obvious, it is the death of Superman in '92. This is coincidentally this year was the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman. That death, along with Jason's death, were deaths in comics that got a lot of media attention. I mean, now maybe the death of Robin got some, but the death of Superman, when that issue, Superman 75, came out, it seemed like the news of the world just stopped. There was nothing going on that day. And it hit everywhere. Some claimed that the death of Superman story, the comics and stuff, was what led to the inevitable crash of the comic industry in the 90s. To me, that's kind of debatable because we all knew he was going to come back. We didn't know how. And to watch a hero get savagely beaten to death while he was trying to save his city and everyone in it, actually was kind of shocking. So, it was like, he ain't going to die. But he did, technically. He did, of course, he did return during the reign of the Supermen. But like I said, at the time, we all knew he was going to come back. We didn't know how. And that might have been what some would call maybe one of the first ones that would be considered a cheap marketing ploy. I don't know, or a cash grab. Who's to say? But I actually enjoyed the story. I enjoyed all three parts of the whole trilogy, or whatever you want to call it. The death of Superman, or Doomsday, whichever one you call it. The Funeral for a Friend, and the Reign of Superman. I really liked it. I really did. And, maybe in a future comic spotlight, I'll talk about those some more. And, but yeah, those are some great examples to me of shocking deaths. Well, and there's another one, now that I come to think about it. I've never read the story. I've just heard a lot about it, and I may end up buying the book. But in Green Lantern, I think it's Volume 3, number 54, Kyle Rayner had just become Green Lantern, and he finds his girlfriend had been killed and cut up and put in his refrigerator by a guy named Major Force, which was one of his villains. I don't know how that story ended, but just that image of him finding his girlfriend in the refrigerator, to me, that had to be pretty gruesome. And I may have to check that series out. All right, now the last aspect of death in comics I'm going to talk about is what's considered the noble sacrifice. And that is where a hero or a villain may sacrifice themselves to save mankind or the universe. I believe three good examples of that, of course, would be when Hal Jordan became Parallax. And, of course, he became Parallax because he was driven insane by the destruction of Coast City that happened in the Superman storyline. He became obsessed with trying to use the power of the Green Lantern rings to bring everyone back, and it drove him mad. And he became a villain. I believe he may have been one of the villains in the Zero Hour, I believe. And then, but in Final Night, the Final Night miniseries, he resurrected him, or not resurrected, but he sacrificed himself to save the Earth. And in doing so, he redeemed himself. That would be one. Of course, Superman, the death of Superman. Superman sacrificed himself to save everybody in Metropolis from Doomsday. That would be another example of a noble sacrifice. Another example of other examples of noble sacrifices would be the death of Barry Allen in Crisis on Infinite Earths #8. He sacrificed himself to try to stop the Anti-Monitor. Another notable sacrifice would be, of course, the death of Jean Grey in Uncanny X-Men 137. She was possessed by the Dark Phoenix, and the Dark Phoenix was responsible for the death of a star system where they had billions of inhabitants by feeding on a star and just wiping out that galaxy. And I'll touch more on that later because, when Jean was resurrected, you find out that it wasn't, the Dark Phoenix wasn't exactly Jean, but it's a long story. But anyway, for this issue, in Uncanny X-Men 137, it was Jean. While the X-Men fought the Shi'ar Imperial Guard on the moon, she lost control again and became the Dark Phoenix, and she regained a little bit of control long enough to activate some dormant weapons that was on the moon and kill herself, because she knew that if she ever completely lost control, it would mean the death of the entire universe. And she sacrificed herself to make sure that never happened. To me, those are some real good examples of sacrificial deaths in comics. Now, we all know, anybody that's read the books know that when they started X Factor, they wanted to resurrect Jean, but for her to be a hero, they had to somehow make her not responsible for the deaths of billions of people from the Dark Phoenix saga. So what they decided on was, of course, in Uncanny X-Men 101, when the shuttle crashed into the bay, she emerged as the Phoenix, or so everybody thought, but not really. The Phoenix Force put her in a cocoon at the bottom of the bay and fashioned a body on her memories and her likeness, because comics. But by doing so, you find that exonerated Jean of being responsible for the death of billions of people. And the Dark Phoenix was its own creature, but using her as a source material, she gained all of her memories, similar to when Doc Ock swapped with Spider-Man. And ultimately, that's what made her sacrifice herself in Uncanny 137. Now, I don't know what people think about when characters die in comics now. I have seen social media comments where death seems just like a running joke now. And in a way, I kind of agree with it. I mean, at one point in time, I used to always say, and me and a lot of people used to say, that the only people that stay dead is Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, Bucky, Batman's parents. And, well, for that part, Bucky is the only one that came back. They brought back Gwen as a clone. And, Uncle Ben shows up every now and then in flashbacks. Now, there are alternate reality versions of other Earths where some of these characters are alive. I believe there's a version where instead of Bruce's parents dying, Bruce died, and I think his father became like Batman, and his mom became the Joker. And I don't remember the name of the issue where it talked about that, but I've heard that's a pretty good read. But for the most part, I personally feel like it seems like with every event, there's always a tragic death, something shocking, whether it be Goliath being killed by the Thor clone in Civil War, or the death of Wolverine, or just the death of anybody. Everybody pretty much knew that when somebody died, then a few years later, well, guess what? They're back. Now, they haven't brought Alfred back yet. Bane snapped his neck in the 3rd volume of Batman issue 77. And so far, he hasn't come back yet. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Is death actually relevant anymore? Does it really mean anything? I'd be interested to hear what you think about it. So before I close out this video, I want to mention a few other deaths that may or may not. Some of them are fairly popular, but some of them are slid a little under the radar, and there were deaths that I took notice of. First and foremost, is the death of the original Tarantula in Amazing Spider-Man 236. He had tried to get superpowers through Roxxon oil, and after Will-O-the-Wisp screwed up the project where he was getting his powers, he mutated into a giant tarantula and basically ended up jumping off a building and being shot by a bunch of cops, and he went splat down on the floor, on the pavement. He may have been resurrected. I think he popped up during the Nick Spencer run towards the end. I don't remember the name of the crossover. May have been Sinister War, but I don't know if that was actually him or not. It may have been, but for the most part, as far as I know, he's still dead. I mentioned Green Lantern's girlfriend in Green Lantern Volume 3, number 54. Like I said, I haven't read it, but I need to, because after seeing just that one page, I got to read that storyline. All the other deaths I've mentioned already, the death of Superman, Gwen Stacy, Bucky, Batman's parents, Uncle Ben, you know, all those are, some were shocking, some not, but all good stories. The next one is, well, the death of Ned Leeds. In Spider-Man Wolverine #1, you know, Peter Parker and Ned Leeds are following an investigation on something, and they end up finding this spy. Spider-Man teams up with Wolverine to help one of Wolverine's friends. But Peter Parker goes back to his apartment and finds Ned pretty much tied up to a chair and dead. And you wouldn't find out till ASM 289 that he was supposed to have been the Hobgoblin. But he wasn't really the original. That's another story in itself that I may get to one of these days. There's also the death of Kraven the Hunter. To me, which is one of the best storylines I ever read in Spider-Man. Kraven's Last Hunt, or Fearful Symmetry, whichever one you want to call it. Spider-Man had just gotten married. He was ambushed and trapped and shot by Kraven and buried. And you find out that Kraven had shot him with a tranq dart, and he was buried for 2 weeks. Buried alive for 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks, Kraven ran around in Spider-Man's costume, imitating him, pummeling bad guys. He captured and beat Vermin. And when Spider-Man crawled out of his grave, he went to confront Kraven, who told him, I beat you anymore. My hunt is over. And he released Vermin to make Spider-Man go after him. And while Spider-Man's going after Vermin, Kraven just promptly goes up and puts a rifle in his mouth and pulls the trigger. And that was actually pretty shocking. After a storyline, you're reading those books, I think for the first time, nobody expected that to happen. And for the most part, he stayed dead. And I don't know when he came back, but he has came back. Off the top of my head, I still think Kraven's Last Hunt is probably one of the better Spider-Man stories. Another Spider-Man death that a lot of people may not remember is the death of the original Sin Eater, Stan Carter. He was responsible for the death of Jean DeWolf in Spectacular Spider-Man 107 to 110. He was after being beaten by Spider-Man, he was incarcerated, and I never really understood his return. Just like 27 issues later, but he was cured, or cured, because they said that he went crazy due to some kind of shield drug that was in the system. But anyway, he was hallucinating and seeing the Sin Eater, and he was trying to do right. And Spider-Man was dealing with Electro at the time. And while Spider-Man was fighting Electro in this plant, Sin Eater, or Stan, he put the costume back on, and because he believed that him and Sin Eater were two different people, and had taken this kid hostage in front of a bunch of NYPD officers. And he kept telling the police officers that Sin Eater had to have his moment. And he threw the kid down and waved his shotgun at the police, and which they promptly opened fire and shot him. And by that time, Spider-Man had already webbed up Electro, and he saw that Stan was laying down on the floor or the pavement, and he walked over, and before Stan died, he told him, he said, "Sin Eater's dead. Now I can live." And he died because he was so far gone. Spider-Man says he was so far gone, he thought that him and Sin Eater were two different people. And the cop said, well, if that's the case, then he got the last laugh because he never loaded Sin Eater's gun. So to me, that was an interesting one. I believe even now, I think during the Nick Spencer run, Sin Eater came back, and I don't know how, but this time he had, like, I called it the magic shotgun, because he'd shoot people with it instead of killing them. It'd take their sins away. And that has reverberated with Norman Osborn in the Gold Goblin series that is running now. But I think those are some good examples. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Tony's Topics, and I hope I didn't ramble off too much. And if you like if you like the videos, watching the videos, please leave a like and subscribe on your way out, and I'll be back soon with episode 3. I'll see you next time.